It's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right, let the King of Glory in. Open up the door starts right now. So fling wide you heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him. He said, behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven. And I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us. The things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass. Those things which must take place. Those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about. Discerning and discussing the issues of the day. Discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. Andy White here, and what you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. Welcome, everybody, from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. Hey, do me a favor, if you are listening, please go on over to my Open Up the Doors Facebook page, if you're able to, and join in the conversation. I am live streaming from my Facebook page at facebook.com/faithfm 91.7. And for those of you who are over there on Facebook Live, let me know where you're watching from, and please share this into your streams and invite people to open up the doors. I would appreciate that so very, very much. Share it into your Facebook stream, your MeWe stream, if that's possible. I'm not even sure. I'm not familiar with MeWe, but everyone seems to be switching over there these days. But share it wherever you can share it. And if you've never liked my Open Up the Doors page, please like the page as well. You can email me at ajwhite777@icloud.com if you'd like to correspond with me. And also, I would highly recommend, please follow me on Parler. I have a Parler account, ajwhite777. You can follow me over there on Parler. That's where I am really kind of doing most of my posting and perusing and interactions these days, getting away from the Facebook miasma of their censorship. So follow me on Parler at ajwhite777. You'll love the experience over there without all the trolling. Well, they have trolls over there too, but at least they're not Facebook fake fact-checking polls. You know, my first broadcast of 2020, I had titled that broadcast 2020 Vision. You know, you just can't get away from playing with that 2020 idea. It just, you know, I know it's kind of cliche-ish, but the first broadcast back in last January was 2020 Vision. This being the final broadcast of 2020, I'm going to keep the theme going, and this broadcast appropriately will be titled 2020 Hindsight. And without argument, I would guarantee almost everybody will agree that 2020 has been a year that would have been almost impossible to have imagined without actually having lived through it. I saw somebody post a meme that I thought was quite humorous last week. The meme said this: I'm beginning to think that the familiar phrase, hindsight is 2020, originated as a message from a future time traveler that we have always profoundly misunderstood. Yes, I find that to be rather humorous. In 2020, in 1 year, we went from a panic attack in the early days of 2020. Everyone was having a panic attack for various reasons that I'll get into in a moment. But we went from a panic attack to a pandemic, from a pandemic to pandemonium, from pandemonium to an outright pandering to Marxists and miscreants who were engaging in a neo-Maoist cultural revolution. Yeah, I'd be willing to bet. That's only the tip of the iceberg. For those of you who have lived through 2020, you know what I'm talking about. And that would be everyone in this audience, I believe. Yeah, but I'd be willing to bet that most of you are glad to see 2020 come to an end. There is a word that is used in the Old Testament that talks a lot about the end of something. That word is akarit. I'm going to talk about akarit, an expected end, or the end of something, in a few moments. But for the moment, let me say this. We're told in Proverbs that there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end, akarit, is the way of death. I'm going to get into that in the next block, so stick around. But I want to do a little bit of a fast-forward rewind of 2020. A fast-forward rewind. I think that's an oxymoron. But let's rewind the tape all the way back to January, right about this time last year, as we were going into the new year. All of a sudden, the Congress was impeaching the president. Yes, back in January, believe it or not, it seems like it was ages ago. It was only, almost a year ago. Impeachments. The impeachment of Donald Trump, which was really how the year started out, and it was really an attempt by the Democrats and by the deep state to obfuscate and cover up the true Biden corruption. That's what that impeachment was about. But that failed, thank God. But then, as we got into February, that's when the COVID-19 started to percolate and hit the news. It was really the end of January when President Trump had closed down the flights from China into America, the very end of January. But it really started to hit the news and hit the daily conversation around February. And then by the time March and April rolled around, that's when we saw lockdowns and the quarantines beginning. And by the time May was rolling around, we were beginning to hear and see the reports of what the disastrous consequences were of, for instance, Andrew Cuomo's policies right here in New York. How he sent all these elderly infected COVID seniors into nursing homes, and 7,000 plus elderly people died because of Andrew Cuomo's actions. There is a way which seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. That's something we saw in hindsight that really hit the proverbial poop hit the fan come April, May, and June, when people started bringing out lawsuits against Andrew Cuomo's policies here in New York. But he wasn't the only governor that went off the rails. There were other governors from other states that introduced the draconian lockdowns, and we saw the results that were the consequences of those lockdowns. In some states like California, it's still going on, but I'll leave that aside for the moment. So in March and April, we see these draconian measures and lockdowns coming. We see these governors taking it upon themselves to be little dictators. And then May rolls around, and we're thinking, all right, May's here. We're coming into the springtime. Things are going to get better. But then the George Floyd incident occurred. And the rioting and the looting ensued. All because, I don't want to say all because, but in large measure because of a video that unfortunately only showed a small portion of the actual confrontation and situation with George Floyd. It wasn't to be for several months later that the full video was released. And if that full video had been released right away, maybe a lot of the rioting and looting would not have happened, because there was a bigger context to that video that the media completely shut down and shut out in the very beginning. And again, not to make any excuses, as I've said throughout that time period, that police officer had, he should never have had his knee on George Floyd's neck for that whole time that he did. But that wasn't the whole of the story. And when you see the entire 20-minute video, you see the whole context of everything that happened there. Nevertheless, it happened, and the rioting and the looting ensued, and the BLM and the Antifa mob, they exploited the situation. Never let a crisis go to waste, and they exploited the situation, as bad as it was, for their own purposes and agenda. So coming out of May and then into June, into July, we began to see this quasi-Maoist American version of a cultural revolution happening here in our country, with the tearing down of statues, with the cancel culture going into full swing, with all that's going on. Like I said, we went from panic to pandemic to pandemonium. 2020. It'll be a year to remember. Well, most of us will want to forget. The summer of 2020 saw the rise of these autonomous zones. Remember Chaz? And they changed Chaz to Chop. I dubbed them back in the summer the Chopastanis, the Chazmanian devils. But again, it was all, BLM and Antifa declaring themselves, rulers of the roost over there in Portland and in Seattle, with the riots and the looting, and the summer of love, as Oregon's governor Kate Brown had called it, when people were coming up against her, telling her she needs to shut this down, and she was actually supporting it, saying, oh, it's going to be a summer of love. Well, it really wasn't a summer of love, especially she decided to change it to, if you remember, as we take this little stroll down memory lane of 2020, it was a summer of love until the protesters showed up at the front door of Governor Kate Brown's home. Funny how that works. All of a sudden, right after that, she shut down Chaz. She shut down Chop. She brought in the police. You see, when the miscreants and the Marxists and the anarchists showed up at her front door, all of a sudden, it wasn't kumbaya. All of a sudden, it wasn't a summer of love. Just amazing how these people abuse their power. But then we get through the summer of 2020, and election season begins in September in full course, full pedal to the pedal. The election season begins in September. This infamously travesty and tragedy of an election season, and I made. Back in late September, early October, I talked about how, September would be known for, not September, I'm sorry, October is always known for October surprises. And this October, there certainly was a whole lot of surprises that happened in October. In fact, in keeping with 2020, I think there were more October surprises this October election season than any other election season in history. There were several. President Trump got COVID. That surprised everybody. There was all kinds of different news stories. But I think, and this is an important one, I think probably the most alarming of the October surprises was the media squashing and censoring the Hunter Biden laptop corruption story. BLM, Biden's laptop matters, and Biden's laptop proved to matter when it comes to the election. Because in hindsight, the media not covering a major news story is itself probably the most effective October surprise of all time. Because polls and surveys, hindsight is 2020, polls and surveys have shown that had the media reported on the Biden laptop, Joe Biden would have gotten 17% less votes than he got. And of course, that's a loaded statement in itself, because I believe Joe Biden got several million votes illegitimately. But I won't get into that right now. But this is just based on what they have. Just using the baseline that the election was legitimate, just using the baseline that all the legal votes were counted and there wasn't any fraud, which of course is ridiculous, but let's go because that's their baseline. According to their polls and their surveys, Biden would have gotten 17% less votes if the media had covered the Hunter Biden laptop. That's the election right there, my friends. That's the election right there. You know, speaking of the election fraud and whatnot, even if you removed all of the allegations and all of the evidence of fraud, between the censorship of the media, in particular in regard to Hunter Biden, as well as how Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and several states, Nevada, Arizona, how they even changed their election laws unconstitutionally by their own states' constitutions, like Pennsylvania. This is why it went to the Supreme Court, and they refused to take it up. If you just look at how the election was handled from a legal perspective, it's still an illegitimate election. But again, I don't want to go down that road too much. I might touch upon it a little later. Nevertheless, that's what happened in October, which brought us into November. November brought us the sham and the scam of this fraudulent election. You know, back in October, I had said something along the lines that come November 3rd, November 4th, we're going to see things happen in this country that we've never would have imagined before. And when I said that, I didn't exactly really fully understand myself what I was sensing. I just knew through a lot of different reasons that we were in for a rough ride for this election season. And I consider that particular, what's the word I want to use? I'm not a prophet. I've never considered myself a prophet. I'm a watchman. That I'll accept. But I will consider that observation to have been founded true, because the things we're seeing in relation to this election are things we have never seen before in an American election ever before. Now, that's not to say they may not have ever happened before, but we've never seen them like we're seeing them now come to light. The entire judicial system, the mainstream media, this is what we're seeing this past month in December, because we've seen a mountain of election fraud exposed, yet ignored by both the media and the courts. It's a tragedy. The entire judicial system, the mainstream media, federal and state election enforcement agencies and commissions are blatantly ignoring the deliberate and systematic theft of a presidential election. It is an unprecedented national tragedy that, if not corrected immediately, will undermine. It will undermine the legitimacy, in my opinion, and the subsequent presidential authority of the Biden administration. I believe his administration will not be recognized by a sizable percentage of U.S. citizens and its disenfranchised voters. And for those of you on the left who keep telling us conservatives on the right, oh, get over it. Excuse me? You never got over Donald Trump winning 4 years ago. For 4 years, you called him an illegitimate president. For 4 years, you tried to undermine him. And now you're bloviating about getting over it? Now you're bloviating about unity? Oh, I'm sorry, my friends. It doesn't work that way. Now you're going to probably be drinking a lot of your own medicine. You know what they say? What goes around comes around. Because I am firmly in the camp of we don't have a country if we don't fix this. Because I know in the very core of my being that this election is fraudulent. And it's on the government to prove us wrong. It's on the government to prove those of us who believe like I do. It's on them to prove us wrong. But they're not. The courts aren't taking up the cases. I am so sick and tired of those on the left saying, all the court cases are being thrown out. They're not being thrown out on the merits. They're being thrown out on technicalities and procedural things. The actual evidence has not been investigated or adjudicated in any court of law as of yet. It's an abomination, and it's up to our government officials to prove us wrong. And they brought this on themselves, my friend. And it's time, and it's coming up fast next Wednesday, January 6th. It's time to prove that we have a government that is transparent and holds liars and deceivers accountable and will abide by the Constitution. That remains to be seen, because without that, we don't have a country any longer. And that was a very fast recap and rewind of 2020 in a nutshell. And I know I left a lot of stuff out because I don't have a lot of time. But here's the most important things I want to get to, because this really sums it up for me. This sums up this year for me in a nutshell. Because as we enter into the year 2021, there are two immutable things that I will carry with me out of 2020. Number one, you will never convince me that China didn't release the coronavirus into the world on purpose. And number two, you will never convince me that the deep state leftists didn't use massive fraud to steal the election for Joe Biden. So welcome, my friends. Welcome to 2021 and the great reset to come. But stick around. I'll be back in a moment. It's still Christmas time. I was thinking about what kind of music to play today. We're past Christmas, but it's still Christmas time. Here's Phil Wickman.
A beautiful December night, snow has turned this city white.
Christmas time. I'll be right back. Stick around.
This old town has gone to sleep, save the church on 2nd Street.
Phil Wickham. It's Christmas time. Welcome back. Andy White here. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And I'm here penetrating the unseen powers of darkness by simply speaking the light of truth, sending powers and principalities into frothy fits of frenzy. Hey, thanks for joining in, everybody. I am streaming live over on my Open Up the Doors page, trying to, as always, on Facebook. The signal's dropped a couple of times, but I have reinitiated it, and we're off and running. Well, I mentioned in the first block about this Hebrew word, akarit. It shows up in many places, but in keeping with today and where I want to go with it, you know, the proverb says there is a way that seems right to a man, but its way in the end is death. What does akarit mean? It's a fascinating word. I want to get into this a little bit, because the Hebrew word akarit comes from the word means back. It's actually a word that means your rear end in some ways, the hindsight, the hinder parts. That's what the word akarit comes from, the backside. To put it in plain terms, akarit literally means that which comes after, and many times the Bible translates it the latter end. And it's got some nuances in that we'll get into. But the principle is that you can't see something from a vantage point. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Because, for example, this word akarit can refer to the after effects of something, the consequences of something, the final end. From our ordinary human vantage point, we cannot see that which comes after. We cannot see the final consequences of a matter, the akarit. Only God knows the end from the beginning. Everything in our fallen world works against having this, well, I probably shouldn't say it that way, but Akarit, it mitigates, wisdom ought to mitigate us saying, forget about the forget about the consequences, excuse me. Just think about now. But God says, focus on the Akarit. In other words, let me give you a little bit of a picture. There's a principle here at work. I'm facing my camera right now, and I'm wearing this this purplish burgundy hoodie. Couldn't think of the word for a second. I don't wear it much. It's very comfortable. My wife got me this hoodie. I think it was last Christmas. But she said to me this morning when I was saying, well, I don't know what I should wear today. She said to me, why don't you wear that hoodie? I like the way that hoodie looks on you. So I put the hoodie on. And now that I see myself on camera with it, it kind of makes me look like a monk. But I'm not a monk. But my point in saying is this. You see the front side here. The idea of Akarit is you can't see what's behind me. Now, remember when we were kids in school, some of you? Remember we used to play a prank on somebody and we would slap something on someone's back, like we would we would slap a sticky note on the back of somebody that said, like I'm a dweeb or something like that, or whatever, some derogatory thing, and the person didn't know it was on their back, and the person would go walking into a room and everybody see them from the front, but when they walked back and they saw their hindsight, and they would start to giggle and laugh and make fun of somebody because that person didn't know that thing was on his back. He couldn't see it. Akarit has this kind of meaning to it that, things are moving forward, but you can't see what happens until they've passed you. Hindsight. It's hidden from us on one side. And so Akarit literally means, again, not to belabor the point, but that which comes after. But the principle is you can't see it from this vantage point. But in the Hebrew, it finally comes to mean the end. There is a way which seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. The prophets which speak of the end of days, for instance, in Isaiah chapter 2, it will come to pass in the end of days. The word there in the Hebrew is akarit. One of the principles of God's wisdom throughout the book of Proverbs is that he shows us that which comes after, which we cannot see from our present vantage point. He shows us that the final consequences of sin and righteousness, he tells us, if we walk in wisdom. Maybe we can't see them now, but we need to understand the Akarit. A positive aspect of that, for instance, is if you look in the book of Proverbs. It says, for instance, in Proverbs 19:20, listen to advice and accept instruction so that in your akarit you will be wise. Listen to advice and accept instruction so that in your latter days you will be wise. So in your future days you will be wise. Listen to the advice and accept instruction so you will be wise in your akarit. That's the whole purpose in many ways of the book of Proverbs, about gaining wisdom, about gaining understanding. But you see, that's the positive. That's God's positive facet of the akarit, of the hindsight, of seeing things in hindsight. Be aware of where things are going. The negative aspect of akarit is that which ends, obviously, in death. A way which seemed right, but it wasn't. It ended in death. All the ways of a man seem right in his own eyes. Like putting COVID-infected elderly patients into a nursing home facility, ended in death. Might have seemed right to Governor Cuomo at the time, but it ended in death. A way which seemed right, but ended in death, like draconian lockdowns of small businesses, which killed off these businesses. I'm hearing reports that there's going to be 40,000 restaurants out of business in New York City. 40,000 restaurants. Quite honestly, that flabbergasted me because I know there's a lot of restaurants in New York City. I had no idea there was that many. And there's actually more than that. But 40,000 of them won't be coming back They were killed because under the guise of ostensibly, and I'll use the word ostensibly, doing good, they did great harm. There's a way which seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Lockdowns and other things, which experts said from the beginning would cause the suicide rate to increase. Experts were saying lockdowns would do more harm than good. Experts were saying the cure can't be worse than the disease. Experts were saying the suicide rate would increase. They were saying domestic violence would increase. And now we're seeing their predictions coming true according to the stats. Because those who thought otherwise, there was a way which seemed right to them. They ignored the instruction of others, and it led to death. The suicide rate is up. There is a way which seems right to a man, but in the end, the akarit, in the hindsight being 2020, we can see that their ideas and their solutions were both ruinous and deadly. And yet, will they learn? Do you think these people will ever learn? The evidence so far is they're not. Will they reverse course and admit they were wrong and turn it around, as in Proverbs 19:20? No, they won't. That doesn't seem to be the case. Many of these people, like Governor Newsom in California, they're doubling down in their arrogance. Hindsight ought to be 2020, but they remain blind and in darkness in their deception. The whole message of the book of Proverbs is to open your eyes so that to that perspective which you can't possibly see, but through the word of God, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. The beginning of the wisdom is the knowledge of the Lord. Open your eyes to the divine perspective so you live right in the here and now. You can make godly decisions in the here and now. Do not lean on your own wisdom and understanding, but in all thy ways acknowledge the Lord, and he will guide your footsteps. The paths of the righteous are guided by the Lord. If you do that in your akarit, your final end, you'll be wise. Part of gaining wisdom is allowing hindsight to inform you moving forward, evaluating new information as you look back upon what you've already seen and experienced. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is gathering all the knowledge that you've gathered and get understanding. That's what the book of Proverbs says. It says get wisdom, get understanding, get knowledge. And with all of your getting, get wisdom. With all of your getting, get understanding. Evaluate what's given to you. That's wisdom. And speaking of such, in keeping with some of the things that we talked about this past year, back in, I think it was May or April or May, I did a broadcast called Here Comes the Sun. And in that broadcast, I talked about how there were studies going on about how, some of it based on what we already knew, but just by common sense, that ultraviolet light kills bacteria. We've known that for forever. The sun is a great disinfectant. Sunlight is a great disinfectant. That's an old, idiomatic phrase that we all understood. And I did a broadcast talking about how they were experimenting with UV light killing the coronavirus. Well, the Israelis just came out with a study stating just that. In fact, where I have it, let me see if I can pull that up. I wanted to share a little bit of the study from the Israelis. This was great because here is further evidence of some of the wisdom that we can gather together in hindsight in dealing with this coronavirus that people have been talking about, and yet the mainstream media ignores it. The mainstream media, when we started talking about sunlight and ultraviolet light killing the coronavirus, I think Trump made mention of it once. They mocked him. They ridiculed him. But here in the Jerusalem Post from this week, Tel Aviv research, 99.9% of COVID-19 virus dead in 30 seconds with UV LEDs, ultraviolet LEDs. The study is the first of its kind in the world, of this particular kind. What they did here, and I'll read some of it, what was this? According to this article, ultraviolet radiation is a common method of killing bacteria and viruses, as I said. Now researchers from Tel Aviv University have proven that the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, I like that word, proven, can be killed efficiently, quickly, and cheaply using ultraviolet light emitting diodes at specific frequencies. The article goes on to say, we discovered that it's quite simple to kill the coronavirus using LED bulbs that radiate ultraviolet light, said Professor Hadass Mamain, head of the Environmental Engineering Program at Tel Aviv University School of Mechanical Engineering. And the article goes on and on and on and on, and I don't have time to go through the whole article, but here's the point. Hey, you know what, folks? It may not be such a terribly crazy bad idea to go out and buy some of these UV black lights. You know what a UV ultraviolet light is? It's essentially a black light. Now, in this particular study, they were taking the UV at very specific frequency ranges. So I would suggest you go and look up the original article and the original study. You can find, I posted both of these on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page, the study that was done, and they go into the frequency ranges of these studies. But it wouldn't be such a bad idea if you went down to Home Depot and you bought yourself some little black light bulbs and put them around the house. It will help to kill any coronavirus and bacteria around your home. That's real simple, and they're pretty cheap. And like I said, I talked about this back in April, and some people were just making fun of it. I feel a little bit vindicated here myself. But you know what? Let me look at the time. I got a few minutes here. This is an important one, because this is something else I've been saying from day one. I'm gonna just share this for a few minutes before I take a break, because another study came out. Another study which really bolstered and proved some of the things I've been saying all year long. Because another new major study has come out that was done between the Chinese, which I know what you're going to say, the Chinese, we don't trust them. But these were done with sincere scientists. Not all the scientists in China are working for the government there. Not all of them. The ones that don't are getting killed. We know there are some good scientists in China. But it was not just China. It was not just China. It was also the UK and the Australians. 19 different scientists worked on this study over these 3 different nations. And they did a major new study. And let me read it here. There is, listen to this, hold on, no evidence, repeat after me, there is no evidence of significant asymptomatic spread. I've been saying this from day one. That's been a scam and a lie. It's been an exploitive scam from the very beginning. We've been witnessing the most egregious mass manipulation society ever perpetrated in history. This study said only 300 asymptomatic cases in the study of nearly 10 million people were discovered, and none of those were tested positive for COVID-19. This article is in Epoch Times and in LifeSite. It was originally published in a scientific journal called Nature Communications. Let me read some of this. The study stated this. I said some of that already. Out of 10 million people, or almost 10 million people in the study, 300 asymptomatic cases were found. Contact tracing, this is the important part, contact tracing was then carried out on those 300, and no cases, 0, of COVID-19 were detected in any of them. A total of 1,174 close contacts of the asymptomatic positive cases were traced, and they all tested negative for COVID-19. Now, I'm running out of time, but the long and short of this is simply this. These findings undermine the need for lockdowns, which are built on the premise of the virus being unwittingly spread by infectious, asymptomatic people. And it completely destroys the need for the ongoing and continuing mask charade. But will any of that stop? Probably not, because there is a way which seems right to a man, but in the end is death. And they've got a whole nother agenda that they're all about. But the whole premise, understand this, the whole premise of masks is to prevent asymptomatic transmission of COVID. But we now know, we've now learned that asymptomatic transmission is a myth. So the entire mask hysteria is based on something that doesn't even exist. And by the way, the WHO did say this back in June. I can't remember her name, but a representative of the WHO was giving a press conference, and she said that the data showed there was no asymptomatic spread that was significant. She used the word it was very rare. Well, this study says it doesn't happen at all. Nevertheless, she let that slip out in June. The very next day, all the narrative gatekeepers and all the powers that be made her recant that. And then she came out and said, I misspoke. I didn't mean asymptomatic. I meant pre-symptomatic. Now, there is a hair-splitting difference between the two. Nevertheless, we were told that asymptomatic spread, we were told, and I rejected this from day one. I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm not an expert, and I don't mean to come across like one, but I have common sense. If you're not sick, you can't spread something if you don't have it. If you don't have the symptoms of wheezing and coughing and hacking up phlegm, you're not going to spread something. It doesn't happen. It's a scam. And we were told in the early days of this that asymptomatic spread was like 60, 70% of all the spread. But now we're finding out that only 6% of people are asymptomatic, and those 6% aren't even spreading it. That is fact. There may be people who want to dispute the facts, but these are the facts from reliable, educated scientists. We've been told, follow the science, follow the science. All I can do is regurgitate to you the information I get from following these scientists. I report, you decide. But I got to take a break. Stick around, folks. I'll be right back. Here's Amy Grant with a tune called I Need a Silent Night. Oh, we certainly do. Listen to the words of this song. They'll really resonate with you. Stick around. I'll be right back.
This same mistake before. Too many malls, too many stores.
It's the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7, 93.3 in that peak, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. I only got a few minutes left. All right, if you've never subscribed to my YouTube channel, I would ask that you would please do that. Go over, look up Andy White. Open Up the Doors on YouTube. Just Google it. If you've never subscribed to the YouTube channel, all of these videos get loaded over there on YouTube. We've got an extensive library there on YouTube. We're going to keep that going as long as YouTube doesn't ever take it down, which I'm beginning to think they're starting to lighten up a little bit after the election. I've been noticing some things. I don't want to get into that right now, but it seems like some of the over-the-top censorship and canceling has been slowing down now that the election's over. That remains to be seen. It's just an observation I've been following. Anyway, please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you never have. Hit the subscription button, and there's a little bell next to it. It'll let you know when I when we upload these audio archives of the broadcast. And every once in a while, I'll do a YouTube live instead of a Facebook live, especially now that I'm in the winter and I got more time. Anyway, all right, so please, again, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you can. Well, I got a few thoughts I want to end up with on this last broadcast of 2020. 2020, a year we saw governors from coast to coast declare themselves de facto dictators where constitutional rights were considered not worth considering. Remember, some of you might remember when Governor Murphy from New Jersey was on Tucker Carlson some time back, and Tucker was interviewing him, and Tucker was pressing him about what authority he had to be shutting down churches and all these things he was doing. And did you look at the Bill of Rights? What does what you're doing have to do with the Bill of Rights? And I watched that episode that night of Tucker, and I almost fell out of my chair because Murphy said he wasn't thinking about the Bill of Rights when he issued all of these social distancing orders and lockdowns. He said to Tucker, "That's above my pay grade." I almost fell over my chair. You are the governor of a state. Knowing basic constitution ought not to be above your pay grade. He told Tucker, "I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when we did this." Yeah, no kidding, Sherlock. We went. First of all, we went to the scientists who said people have to stay away from each other. Well, scientists didn't write the Constitution. And they're not the ones who enforce the Constitution. But either way, this is the kind of year we've had. As I said earlier in the broadcast, we had governors like Andrew Cuomo putting elderly COVID patients into nursing homes that caused the death of 7,000 plus seniors. And then to make this year even crazier, Cuomo was putting on a daily TV show where he acted like a great savior and a great leader who didn't need God. Remember when the numbers really did fall in early spring, late spring, and he said God didn't do that, faith didn't do that, we did that. Again, another time you feel like you're falling under, you want to fall under or off the chair, and then to honor the great savior Andrew Cuomo for all of his great performance and all of his great acting, which is what it was, he actually won an Emmy. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up, folks. Andrew Cuomo actually won an Emmy for his winning performances. 2020, the year that we saw all the elites bloviate their coronavirus dictates to the plebes like you and me, but totally disregard their own dictates. But I'll just leave it there. I'm running out of time. I want to end on a better. I had so much other stuff here that I wanted to get to about Akarit, about having a good end, because there's a positive part to Akarit. Proverbs talks a lot about the negative. It says, "Do not fret because of evil men, or be envious of the wicked, for the evil man has no future." The word there for future is Akarit. He's got no future hope. But we all know Jeremiah 29:11. Here's the good part. "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." The word for future there is Akarit. It talks about a determined end that's good. That's the positive side to all this. That's the wisdom of having hindsight being 2020, to give us hope in our latter end. So the question I want to ask as I close is, what is your latter end going to be? Will it be one of mourning and weeping, hopelessness and darkness? Or will it be one that is hopeful? Because there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. But the Lord says, "I know the plans I have for you, to give you a future, to give you an akarit and a hope, a hopeful future." See, God has laid out a path before us, brothers and sisters. It's a choice that we have to make every day of our lives. The patterns of living that we establish now are going to continue to work themselves out for eternity. Consider, my friends, your final end. But know this, the akarit, the future end of believers, will be blessed. 2020 was a turning point year as we enter into 2021. And I believe 2021 is going to even heat up even more. Remain steadfast in the faith, looking unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Listen for the voice of the Lord saying, "This is the way, walk in it," and do what he leads you and shows you what to do. And remember, that will always be in concert and in harmony with his word. Let his word, brothers and sisters, as you come into the new year, let his word be your way. be a light unto your path and a lamp unto your feet. Let his truth be your shield and buckler. And as I close this final broadcast of 2020, if saying Happy New Year seems too much like an empty sentiment or a cliche, then let me say most sincerely, I wish you to have a blessed in him New Year. Be blessed in him, brothers and sisters. Be blessed in him and rest in him, both now and always. I'll be back next week with a brand new edition of Open Up the Doors. God bless you, everybody. Thanks for joining in.